In 1915, this remote village in Quebec had electricity, running water, and indoor toilets, comforts many working families in the province still did not have. The streets were planned, the houses were solid, the lights came on in the forest, but the families in Val-Jalbert owned none of it. Not the houses, not the ground beneath them, not the pipes, the power, the streets, or the economic engine that made the lights come on. Their future ran through one company, one mill, and one waterfall-powered paper empire. So when that mill stopped, the damage did not stop at the factory gate. Val-Jalbert's life support system began to shut down. Today, the houses still stand inside a protected historical site. The falls still roar. But the town they powered was built on a condition hidden inside every modern comfort. It could all be unplugged. This is Val-Jalbert, the ghost town built by a paper empire. That is the puzzle here. Why a village with pipes, lights, streets, and families could disappear when one mill closed. Val-Jalbert has to be read less as a ruin and more as a working system. On one side, clean water in pipes, electric light in company houses, streets laid out as if the place had a future. On the other, the same company that needed workers also owned the houses, the infrastructure, and the industrial reason the village existed. Company towns were often built for practical reasons. Remote industry needed a workforce near the machines, so housing, services, and order became business infrastructure. The sharper question is what happens when a family's home, utilities, wages, school, church-going rhythm, and future are all tied to one balance sheet. Follow the lines backward, and the system narrows to three things: the waterfall that made the site valuable, the pulp technology that made it profitable, and the ownership structure that made its comforts fragile. Start with power. Before there was a village, there was the falls. At Val-Jalbert, the falls were not background scenery. They were the engine. The site sits in Quebec's Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, where forest, river, and industry could meet in one narrow place. The Ouiachiouan River drops over the Ouiachiouan Falls by about 72 meters, then runs toward Lac-Saint-Jean. For an early 20th century pulp operator, that was usable force. In 1901, Damasse Jalbert founded the settlement beside that drop. The location solved the mill owner's problem: wood nearby, falling water strong enough to drive machinery, and a growing paper economy hungry for pulp. The pulp made here was mechanical pulp. Logs were pressed against grinding stones, and the wood was torn into wet fiber for the paper supply chain. The idea was simple, but grinding wood at scale demanded constant power. The waterfall turned gravity into motion, and motion into production. So before Val-Jalbert was a village, it was a chain of force: river to falls, falls to mill, mill to pulp. Only after that does the human map appear. A remote pulp mill needed men close enough to hear the whistle, families close enough to stay, and services close enough to make that workforce stable. Once the machines had a reason to be here, the houses followed. Because the mill needed workers who would stay, Val-Jalbert became more than cabins at the edge of the forest. Under the Chicoutimi Pulp Company, the settlement was shaped into a planned industrial village. Streets, houses, services, and public life arranged around the factory that paid for it all. For a working family in rural Quebec in the early 1900s, that could mean something remarkable. By around 1915, Val-Jalbert homes had access to electricity, running water, sewer service, and indoor toilets, comforts many communities closer to major cities still did not take for granted. This is the detail that keeps the story honest. The company town was not only a harsh industrial bargain, it could feel like progress you could touch: a light after dark, water through a pipe instead of a bucket, waste carried away out of sight, children growing up on streets built for a permanent village rather than a temporary camp. And the company town needed more than utilities. A town built for families needed places to gather, rules to live by, a school day, a Sunday rhythm, the ordinary architecture of belonging. That is why the ruins still feel strangely complete. The houses were not props beside a mill. They were part of an engineered living system. But every pipe, wire, road, and roof pointed back to the same source. The comfort was real. So was the dependency. Then the fine print comes into view. The same company system that brought light, water, sewer pipes, and orderly streets also owned the physical frame those comforts ran through. The houses were company houses. The services depended on company infrastructure. The village economy turned around one mill, one payroll, and one industrial reason for being. For a worker's family, that could feel stable while the machines ran. A mill job was a wage, but also the key to a roof, a street, neighbors, and routines that made this remote place feel permanent. The company did not have to be a cartoon villain for the arrangement to carry enormous power. This was corporate paternalism. The employer provided more than work, and private life became tied to the employer's continued success. That bargain makes Val Jalbert important. Its comforts were not fake, but they were bundled inside a structure residents did not control. If an independent town loses one employer, people suffer, but there may still be other landlords, businesses, credit, and reasons to remain. Val Jalbert had less room to absorb a shock. Its housing, utilities, and civic life were built around the pulp operation at the falls. The mill was not just the largest workplace, it was the load-bearing wall of the community. The village's weakness was not that it was primitive, it was modern, but with too few independent supports. Every improvement made daily life easier, while deepening the same dependency line back to the company ledger. As long as that machine had a market, the model town could glow. If pressure reached that one engine, there was nowhere else for the village's future to stand. And the pressure came not from the waterfall, but from the changing world of paper itself. Val Jalbert's mill was built for mechanical pulp, wood pressed against grinding stones, torn into fibers by force, with the Ouiachuan Falls supplying the power that made the process economical. For this landscape, the match made sense. Forest above, water beside it, machinery at the base of the falls, workers close enough to keep the system moving. But the product had limits. Because the fibers were physically ground apart, the paper it helped make was useful, especially for newsprint and cheaper printed material, but it was not as strong or durable as pulp made by chemical processes. Chemical pulp treated wood differently, breaking down more of the binding material around the fibers, and leaving a stronger product for markets that increasingly valued strength, consistency, and higher grade uses. Mechanical pulp did not vanish overnight. Mills kept running where the numbers still worked. But Val Jalbert's advantage was narrow. Its machinery, power system, and village had been optimized around one kind of production. So when investment and demand moved towards stronger chemical pulp, adaptation meant more than changing a product label. It meant new processes, new equipment, new capital, and a company already carrying the weight of a town on its books. A change in paper quality standards, far beyond the falls, could move through the market, land in the mill ledger, and then reach wages, houses, utilities, and families. The waterfall still had power. The business model built around that power was aging faster than the village could survive. By the summer of 1927, that aging business model had become a balance sheet problem the village could no longer absorb. August 13, 1927. On that day, the Val Jalbert mill ceased operations. No explosion, no sabotage, no single villain at the gate, just industrial arithmetic reaching the end of the line. The product was under pressure. The machinery was specialized. The company behind the village, the Chicoutimi Pulp Company, was carrying broader financial strain and heavy obligations at the moment when adapting to a changing paper market required new capital. All of it arrived at the mill. For any factory, closure is devastating. Wages stop, orders stop, maintenance stops. But Val Jalbert was a whole civic machine built around one industrial engine. When the grinders stopped turning, the shock did not stay inside the mill walls. It traveled along every dependency line the company had created and maintained. From payroll to rent, from rent to housing, from housing to the streets and services that made the village feel modern. This is the hinge of the Val Jalbert story. The town did not die because it was backward. It died because it was modern in a specific, fragile way. Its electricity, water, sewer system, school life, stores, homes, and work had been bundled under one corporate purpose. As long as the mill made sense, that bundle looked like security. When the mill no longer made sense, the bundle became a failure mechanism. The waterfall kept falling. The buildings still stood. The streets held their shape. But the machine that gave all of it a reason to exist had gone silent. For the families still in Val Jalbert, silence became practical. A closed mill meant lost wages, but here it also meant the reason for living in that exact place had disappeared. The houses had been built for the workforce. The streets served the mill village. The utilities, school life, stores, and daily rhythms of neighbors on the same planned roads were tied to one industrial purpose. At its height, Val Jalbert's population is often described as approaching nearly 1,000 people. After August 1927, that number fell fast. Not in one dramatic night, and not as a supernatural mystery, but through ordinary, painful decisions after a town loses its only engine. A father looking for work elsewhere, a family packing what could be carried, a child leaving a classroom with no future around it. One empty house becoming two, then a row, then a grid with fewer voices each season. By 1929, Val Jalbert was essentially deserted. That is what made the collapse so complete. If a worker in an ordinary town lost a job, the house, street, church steps, shop counter, and neighbors might still remain as a base to rebuild from. In Val Jalbert, the base itself was part of the company system. When the system failed, people were uprooted from a civic world that had been rented around them. Today, Val Jalbert is not a forbidden ruin. It is a protected historical site, preserved and visited under regulated conditions. You can walk its paths, look into empty windows, and see the shape of a place once carefully planned for life. And from those paths, the view leads back to the two anchors that started the story, the houses and the waterfall. Back among the houses and the falls, the opening contradiction becomes clear. Val Jalbert was not a fake paradise. The lights were real. The running water was real. The indoor toilets, planned streets, school, church, and sense of arrival in a modern age were real. But they were conditional. The waterfall kept moving after the grinders stopped. The houses remained after the families left. What disappeared was the system that had tied water, wood, wages, rent, utilities, and civic life into one company-owned circuit. That is why the empty windows matter. They are proof that comfort and security are not the same thing. A company town can build a future faster than the world around it. It can bring light into the forest, pipes into the walls, and wages into a remote valley. But when one employer owns the houses, the infrastructure, and the only reason the town exists, business risk does not stay inside a ledger. It reaches the street, it reaches the kitchen table, and in Val Jalbert, it reached the edge of the map. The falls still run, the village still stands, but the future people rented here was unplugged by the paper empire that built it.